Okay, State of Sports WNBA edition now. Maria Marino, one of my favorite people in the industry, honestly, is joining me here. WNBA expert. Also, we worked together at Action Network. She was hosting Buckets WNBA version of Buckets and is now a contributor at ESPN and perhaps some other things in 2025. We may get into that. But Maria, very happy to have you here. You've been covering the W. You're a fan of the W as well, but you've been covering the W closely, and we have some big picture things that I wanted to get into, and I couldn't really think of anybody better.
Oh, well, I appreciate the kind words. It's great to see you, great to chat with you, and I'm excited to get into this. It's obviously like the most exciting time ever for the WNBA.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, in other words, so year in review slash look ahead into 2025 because that's what State of Sports is in this series. The first thing we're to get into is the collective bargaining agreement situation because I think a lot of people may have freaked out when the day after the WNBA finals, the players are like, "Hey, we're opting out." When the deadline was looming, and now basically there's a year up until November 1st or October 31st of 2025. Basically, shortly after the WNBA finals concludes, we'll know whether or not by then if there's going to be a new CBA. And there are obvious reasons as to why this is going on, which we'll get into. But I mean, what was your takeaway overall? One, when the opt out happened, and two, how do you like what's your general view on this entire ordeal, if we want to call it that?
This is the ideal scenario for the WNBA and the collective bargaining agreement. This opt out was totally expected. And if you didn't expect it, it's probably because you're somewhat newer to covering and following the league, which is totally fine.
Yep.
But we knew this was likely going to happen for a long time. And once we found out that the WNBA, in conjunction with the NBA, secured a new media rights deal, which would vastly change its revenue stream, it was pretty much confirming that, okay, it makes a lot of sense to opt out of this current CBA now because it's so out of date. And I just mean that in terms of how much the WNBA has grown over the past 4 years and soon to be five when this CBA will be completed. It's so obvious. I mean, the last CBA was actually pretty groundbreaking in itself with some of the rights that the WNBA players secured, and they did get some salary increase from that. But that was early 2020 that was announced. So it's a completely new era in the W. And at that time in 2020, there was already some momentum for women's basketball that we were seeing. And so it was obviously too premature to do anything too drastic, but you got the CBA done. Then in the ensuing years, you see every year ratings growth, attendance growth, sponsorship growth, and all these other data markers that are basically telling you that, okay, pretty soon we're going to be able to make more money as a league. And that is then going to be able to translate to higher salaries and other rights afforded to the players, such as the charter flights, which were enacted last year, which is kind of funny to me only because you might remember a few years ago, the New York Liberty
Yeah.
were reportedly fined $500,000 for doing charter flights for their players. And the reasoning at that time was that the CBA didn't allow it. Obviously, the sport grew maybe faster and more ferociously than even the league executives realized would happen. And so the charter flights became a thing this past season, which made a ton of sense. Anyway, but like people that if you were freaking out thinking like, who do these WNBA players think they are opting out of the CBA? It's like, why would you not opt out of the
Right.
CBA? It's clearly out of date. You just signed a new media rights deal that is what I'm not the best at math, but quadrupling or it's
It's
significantly increasing your revenue. The
yeah.
primary way that leagues make money, all major sports leagues for the most part, is through media rights. So with that secured, it was like, okay, it's go time. And now we have a year to it's not the players going on strike, it's not the players complaining, it's just common sense that they would now look at this newfound income and be like, okay, how can we redistribute this properly?
It's also less about, I think, the actual money and more about the percentage, right? It's like giving the rightful percentage
Hmm.
to us being the players in this case, where they're like, hey, we see where things are heading. The media rights deal that you mentioned, which is an important piece of this, in July, WNBA per ESPN, WNBA announced a new 11-year media rights deal featuring partnerships with Disney, Amazon Prime, and NBC Universal, aka billion dollar business, and another billion-dollar business,
Yes.
multi-billion. And it's valued, this media rights deal, for 11 years at $2.2 billion or 200 million per year.
Yep.
And then with future agreements pending, like this could potentially be a $3 billion deal.
Right. So great point. So the current deal as it stands, W was getting about 60 million. So now you're jumping up to 200.
More
And
than triple.
correct. So then you also have to factor in that they can do additional deals, like with Ion, for example, or CBS, which they already do separately from the NBA, the joint NBA deal. So they'll probably get additional revenue from that. The current Ion deal is 13 million per year already. That's probably going to go up. And again, the reason that they could command these higher valuations is because now we have data, and in particular this past season, just showing how the TV ratings in particular have gone up significantly, and that's what just allowed them the negotiating power. Like honestly, it happened just in time.
I'm sure rookie salaries are going to go up
Yeah.
again, being a part of this. You mentioned the last CBA. One of the landmark things with that one was player salaries just going up in general
Hmm.
across the board. Max salaries going up. I believe the max salary for 2024 was close to $250,000, and obviously there are
Yes.
players who make more than that based on endorsements, but not everybody. And I think people see that and be like, oh, they're making enough, and it's like not really when you look
Yeah.
at the percentage that they want to get. So I ultimately think there's going to be a deal done. It's in everyone's best interest, given like how this is all moving, how
Right.
it's improving, and we're talking about this being the best time for the league really in history.
Yeah.
Like it's a viable. It's not even just like, oh, the league is better talent wise. It's also like a viable and sought after TV product in the eyes of like businesses who view it that way.
Absolutely. And a CBA is about fairness. It's not
Yeah.
about, players demanding something that they don't deserve, right? It's a two-way street. It's two sides that are coming together to, create an atmosphere that is going to allow its product to shine by giving the players certain rights and things that will make them be able to continue to improve that product. And we're only going to have additional sources of revenue with league expansion, which we'll get into in a minute here. But you brought up the revenue share. That's the big piece. You've probably seen video snippets and here and there on social media. Kelsey Plum, I know there's a famous one of her talking about it, but yeah, WNBA players only receive about 10% of the league
Right.
revenue, whereas NBA players, for example, earn close to 50%, which again, like obviously you have to get to a point where the league is financially sound and savvy and making money in order to get to a point to be able to increase that revenue share. And maybe you can make an argument that that revenue share was never really fair in the first place. I don't know the financials, from back in the day when the league has started, but one other thing, Brian, that I want to sort of get off my chest is that some people have looked at the WNBA players opting out of the CBA and thought the audacity when the league is reportedly still losing $40 million this year. And when you make a statement like that, you're lacking so much context. To quote a famous economist, David Berry, assertions are not facts. And we've seen sources say what the WNBA is reportedly losing, this year in dollar amount. Prior to this year, we had like one little bit of information that was given by Adam Silver back in 2018. He said at that time that the league was losing about $10 million a year.
Hmm.
And as you can imagine, every hater on the internet brought that up
Yeah.
repeatedly
Yeah.
in the subsequent years. Now, again, no one has opened up the books, publicly. And there was a report in the New York Post that came out literally the day before the Liberty just won their championship, talking about, oh, NBA owners are frustrated. The league is losing $40 million. First of all, you got to stop and think about the timing of that. Who are these sources? Might they be NBA owners who maybe previously had a stake in the W or owned a W team and might be disgruntled about that? Like, you have to like wonder where the information is coming from, number one.
Hmm.
Number two, let's assume that the $40 million figure is accurate. So I just told you in 2018, Adam Silver said the league was losing 10 million a year.
Hmm.
Well, a couple years after that, once the charter flights started becoming a really big topic, Commissioner Kathy Engelbert had said, hey, that would cost us $25 million to
Hmm.
enact charter flights. So, quick math, 25 plus 10 is 35. That's
Right.
not that far off than this $40 million figure. And we knew, Bryan, that this was going to happen. Why? Because we knew that the media rights deal was undervalued. They were only getting 60 mil a year. And guess what? We knew that this year they would be negotiating a new deal. So again, none of this is surprising. And once we get to this new media deal, which for the W is going to be enacted not next season, but the following in 2026, it's like just be a little bit more patient. The money is coming. The popularity is coming. And if you want further proof of how the league is doing, look at how many cities and sports ownership groups are now vying to own teams. The list is getting longer and longer and longer. If the league was in such a bad state, why does everyone and their mom want to own a WNBA team? And I'm talking like we have ownership groups coming out of the woodwork now. We just heard Jason Tatum wants to bring a team to St. Louis. Patrick Mahomes and his ownership group wants to take a team to Kansas City. We've already been hearing for years about Philadelphia, Denver, the Cleveland ownership group that owns the Cavs, the Milwaukee ownership group that owns the Bucks. They all want in on WNBA teams. So again, it's plain as day how healthy the league is right now.
This sets us right up for our expansion conversation, which that's going to be part of the CBA too. It's like now that there are going to be more teams, yes, people are going to want more money because there's going to be more sharing of the pie, so to speak. And hopefully, this is another thing that's going to come with this. Hopefully, expanded rosters, because that's something else that people have been trying to push for. Because there are so many talented players who are WNBA caliber who
Yes.
can't break into the league because the roster sizes are limited and because they've only been 12 teams. Now there's 13 and there's going to be 15 and the league wants 16. And
Yep.
based on the way we're seeing people want teams, we could get very quickly to like 18, 20, maybe by the end of the decade. Like, I don't think that's impossible.
I don't think that's unreasonable at all. As far as the roster spots, just by way of expanding and adding additional teams, obviously you're going to have more opportunities for high end talent to play in the league. I do think down the road there could be a question about a developmental league, a la NBA G League,
Hmm.
that might help further benefit these players. It is nice, at least, that they're going to be having additional opportunities outside of the W to help feed the game, such as Athletes Unlimited and
Yes.
more recently Unrivaled.
Unrivaled.
But
Yep.
as far as the expansion is concerned, there are a few different reasons why it's going to be so important just for the growth and the financial stability of the league. Think about how much the W has grown only being in 12 markets. Like for
Hmm.
a long time now, like the last time we had an expansion team was Atlanta in I believe 2008. But so in this time, only 12 cities having the ability to experience in person a WNBA game, to have that sort of buzz around the city. So the fact that we're going to have 13 next year, you mentioned 15 the year after that, I would be shocked if we didn't quickly have a 16th team. The original goal was to have 16 by 2028. I think it's going to be by 27 because
Yeah.
there's clearly so many interested teams. And to your point, given all of the cities and all of the ownership groups that are expressing interest in this, I feel like this is kind of the first wave where Commissioner Engelbert and the league executives can say, okay, right now, this is going to be the next city, but we now have an idea of all these other cities that are highly interested, that are contenders, that, we'll probably get to 20 sooner than later. But it's the exposure, being in those cities, the amount of games that you're going to be able to play, that's going to be increased revenue from attendance. That's going to be, again, increased revenue from media rights. And don't forget that within the media rights deal that the W is that has newly come about, they are also going to be able to potentially renegotiate if the value of the league continues to skyrocket in
Hmm.
2-3 years. They could say, hey, we want to redo this, you know what I mean? Or we want to adjust some of these things, because again, if you're getting more games and more eyeballs, it's potential for more money for everybody.
That's interesting because in 2 3 years we're talking about the Juju Watkins,
Mm-hmm.
Hannah Hidalgo draft class
Mm-hmm.
potentially. And I mean, I wouldn't say assuming that they're going to come out because they are, but I mean, these are players, Juju in particular.
Mm-hmm.
There's already talk of like how popular she can become, and
Yeah.
obviously how good she can be right away when it comes to the WNBA. But we're still a couple years away from that. The expansion piece is interesting because we've known like there's been a gap in terms of, hey, there are so many players who could be in the league right now that just aren't. There was a year a couple seasons ago, remember if it's 21 or 22, whatever the case would be, where like rookie of the year Crystal Dangerfield gets cut, a high end like draft pick like Maya Hollingshed who can't stick in the league despite being picked in the top 10. You have other like highly drafted players and talented players who are just not in the league, so to speak. And now there's going to be more opportunity here because Golden State has a team, a fun team also. Like the roster itself is actually pretty fun. I sneaky think like they could be very very interesting, and
Yeah.
they're going to play fast. And then you have teams coming to Portland and Toronto in 2026. So there's going to be
Mm-hmm.
another expansion draft, another drama filled night where we'll see which players get protected, which don't.
Yes.
And the 16th market, you mentioned like people vying for this. Like there's been talk about Denver's interest,
Mm-hmm.
Nashville's interest, multiple cities in Florida, Orlando, Miami, and Jacksonville, according to Sports Business Journal, like are interested in potentially having a team. And Philadelphia, who that's the one for me where I'm like the amount of basketball history in Philadelphia, men and
Yeah.
women who have come from there, like that's sort of the spot for me. And I'm sure
Yeah.
there'll be a movement for Dawn Staley to potentially make the leap and coach the team in the WNBA. But I mean, just overall expansion. Like, what are your thoughts on where this is potentially heading beyond what we've talked about? But like, maybe even more so from a basketball standpoint, like it's going to be interesting how these teams fill out the rosters because if you look at with what Golden State did. Like Julie Van Loo, like she can be a consequential player. You have Time
Yes.
Fogbinlay, you have Kate Martin, which is
Yeah.
one of the big ones, and Kayla Thornton, who helped the Liberty win a championship. Like these are legitimate players that these newer teams could wind up with right away.
So, as far as the talent pool is concerned, for so long we had the 144, which, when you think about it, is insane. I mean, that's basically the hardest league to make just
Yeah.
by sheer
Yeah.
roster spots, right? So, therefore, you were getting best of the best of the best. Sound like Men in Black, sir. Best of the best talent, right? Uh, didn't expect that reference. Shout out Will Smith.
Yeah,
Anyway,
right.
um, so you had like just the super high end talent. Now, okay, with 13 teams and eventually 15, I still think that talent level is going to be super super high. It's not going to water down the product, in my opinion. I think it's just going to only showcase more of the talent and just more competition, and obviously expose more of the country and eventually the world, to great basketball, WNBA basketball. And as outlined, just, it's going to affect the business model uh just significantly.
Right.
And then also you have to look at like these newer ownership groups are, they are taking responsibility over these teams. They are trying to compete. They are investing money. Like certainly the Brooklyn Nets ownership and what the New York Liberty just did is a prime example of,
Hmm.
hey, we're gonna invest and we're gonna get some ROI here because we're breaking attendance records and everything else. Matt Ishbia with Phoenix, Mark Davis with Las Vegas. These are teams that were like, hey, we're building gigantic, gorgeous facilities to attract people. And then Golden State, I think, is going to be right there. They're another ownership group that has always sort of, that area has been supportive of women's basketball. Steph Curry is obviously the face of Golden State. He's been extremely supportive, mentoring, AZ Fudd, for example, and having relationships with Sabrina Ionescu and, is obviously related in some way to Cameron Brink. And just, the support for women's basketball has always been there. And again, you have a group that's committed to making it the best it can possibly be. You talked about the expansion draft.
Yes.
It's such a perfect way for the league to stay top of mind in the off season. I mean, already the last few years, free agency has been like,
Chaotic.
it's been good. It's been exciting. Like it's been more akin to like NBA free agency where there's like a lot of player movement and it's exciting. So already the last few years we've been seeing the W be more ingrained in the year-round conversation. Now with an expansion draft, it was like, oh, we have an excuse now to talk about the WNBA. And was it December? I think it was
Yeah, it was early
weeks
December.
ago.
Yeah.
So like December, we have an expansion draft and you have like all of these newsworthy things to
Hmm.
talk about. And like you mentioned the speculation, who's going to be protected, who's going to be chosen, all these things. Like we're going to have that for the foreseeable future for the next few years, assuming we keep adding teams.
There's going to be an increased familiarity with who is in the draft too, because like Kayla Thornton is a recognizable name. Kate Martin was somebody who was very popular, not just because she played at Iowa, but
Mm-hmm.
she was also with the Aces on a team where like Asia Wilson embraced her right away. The
Mm-hmm.
team embraced her right away. And now she's going to have a, I don't know if starring role is overstating it, but we're expecting her to get some playing time for sure. And the expansion draft comes at an interesting time because now you're seeing more and more deeper draft classes just come into the league. These talent pools, like there's gonna be like one of these expansion teams are gonna have a chance at a Paige Beckers. Not this year because unfortunately Golden State has like the fifth pick. We'll see if one of these expansion teams can get Juju Watkins if we get an expansion team at the year she comes out in 2027. Like that's going to be really interesting in terms of like, all right, how does that shape shift the sort of market? Because you have this young phenom, whoever it is at the time, joining this expansion franchise. And then it's like, oh, you instantly have like a hand in hand combo that you can put on television and play against Caitlin Clark in Indiana, Angel Reese in Chicago, etc.
Well, and this all ties into the popularity of women's college basketball and why it was so important for women's college basketball to be put in better positions in terms of broadcasting and exposure. Because remember, prior to 2021, you couldn't find, like, they didn't televise every game of the NCAA tournament. Like,
That's
how
true.
insane is that? And then, you had obviously the fallout of the bubble situation in 2021, which changed everything in terms of the NCAA
Mm,
really evaluating their internal processes and coming to the conclusion that they had prioritized and incentivized success in men's basketball to the point of neglecting women's basketball. And
hmm.
then they started reallocating money and resources to make it more equitable. And now you see that boom, and that all has culminated with this past NCAA Final Four and the national championship game outdrawing the men in viewership for the first time ever. And like it all is now, this is all benefiting the W because as you mentioned, with the more roster spots available and people being more familiar with who is being drafted. Like now there are stars up and down. So like when we saw this past year, the rookie class, yes, Caitlin Clark was, I think, the overarching household name for the
Yes.
casual fan who maybe wasn't even necessarily a basketball fan, just sort of became a household name, which was in part because of NIL, by the way, because you're seeing her and you're seeing other athletes too, but on the State Farm commercials and the Gatorade commercials and all that. But there are more recognizable college basketball players coming out of the women's side that people are invested in and know, and now they're going to want to follow them at their WNBA destination and understand that they actually have a better shot at like making an impact on a team.
Speaking of Caitlin Clark, we'll end with her. The just
Her.
the yeah, just I mean, she is her.
Yes, yes.
You know, like
Yeah.
if you want to put it that way. The Caitlin Clark effect, and Angel Reese's name will obviously come up here. The Caitlin Clark effect in 2024. I mean, Time Athlete of the Year is probably like an interesting starting point, but
Yes.
you know, and the quotes she had there resonated. There were a lot of people who claim to be diehard fans of hers who disagreed with some of her stances on things and think that she's been bent into a different position or whatever the case may be. But ultimately, what does this look like in 2025, Maria? Like, is what I'm interested in, because there's a case right now, that she is currently the most famous basketball player in the country. It's not to say she's lifetime more popular than LeBron James, but it
Right.
feels like more people are curious about her right now just because LeBron's been in our lives for so long. Steph Curry's been in our lives for so long. She's new, and that's why this is like interesting as being part of it. But and also from a basketball standpoint, like I'm gonna give you some numbers here. This was a big thing about her rookie season before
Right.
the break, because people got to remember, when you're drafted into the WNBA, you go right into the WNBA. Like there's no off season or whatever. Like it's you're in
The
camp.
draft is a week after the national championship game. It's a week after.
Yes, and then you're in camp. You got to relocate. It's chaotic. So, Caitlin Clark before the break, and there was an Olympic break last year.
Yeah.
So this is the break I'm referring to. 17 points per game, 8 assists, about 6 rebounds,
Hmm.
bunch of turnovers both before and
Right.
after the break. That's a conversation for another day, but shot 40, 33, 89 splits. And her points per game jumped by 6. After the break, it was 23. The assists jumped from 8 to about 9. The rebounds were a slight drop off, but rebounds are rebounds. She's a point guard. The turnovers were still at 5.6. That's a lot. Might
Hmm.
might want to cut that one down.
Hmm.
But the shooting percentages, from 40 to 43, from 33 from 3 to 37 on about 10 3-point attempts per game. The free throws even went up from 89 to 93. You saw a different player. And then in the playoffs, she struggled, but that was like the worst matchup possible for her in Connecticut.
Hmm.
What does this look like in year 2? On the court, off the court, the Caitlin Clark experience.
Okay. Let's start with Time Athlete of the Year because
Yeah.
you mentioned that first. And I just have to say that I was extremely impressed with the interview. And, Caitlin Clark has been choosy about opening herself up to these types of interviews. And I really attribute that to her just being extremely focused about being a ball player, and I think that maybe caused some unrest among fans over the course of the season where they're like, is she not aware of what's going on in social media? Is she not aware of some of these, you know, um, vitriolic forms of discourse? And truth be told, I actually envy her and idolize the fact that she is able to block out social media and she stays off social media. I think a lot of people's mental health would be better if they weren't on social media so much and getting sucked into
Agree.
some dangerous discourse. Now, that being said, I've always felt that she always said the right things. And like, if you're not satisfied with what Caitlin has been saying on both sides, whether you think she's saying too much or not saying enough, I think that says more about you than it does about her. I don't think she's a controversial person. She said that in the Time piece, and I think it's really true. And people react to what she says so viciously. No matter what she says,
Yeah.
there are people that are going to spin it and turn it into something controversial when it's really not all that controversial. Like, I just have to say, when I saw people upset about her acknowledging that white privilege exists, I don't get that. Like, it's not like she was apologizing. She didn't say, "I'm sorry for being white." She just literally said, there is white privilege, period. That's it. She's not saying that that's why she's gotten all this attention. I think she's just acknowledging that it's a factor. But look, let's be clear. What Caitlin has done on the court has been undeniable and unprecedented. And that is the main reason why she has captivated a nation. Because when you have something like you're chasing a 50 plus year record, a Division One scoring record for men and women by Pete Maravich, who's a legendary name and player. Something like that is extremely newsworthy, and it made all of her games like must watch. And it started with, prior to that, her breaking the NCAA women's record. And what was so great about that record chase was not only were we privy to watching Caitlin, this generational talent, and learning more about other players, including her teammates and her opponents, we also learned along the way about other players in the history of the game. And that's what's so cool about like a record chase like that. You actually learn more about the history. And somebody like a Lynette Woodard suddenly got flowers that she had never gotten before because people didn't acknowledge her before. This gave us an excuse to learn about these great players. I think people forget about that. So that happened. And then you couple that with the incredible, the viewership, the attendance. Let's not forget, I think it was 56,000 people went to an Iowa preseason game before last college season. Like, was that not already going to be a clue of like how big this thing was going to get? And then you mentioned, the you talk about the attendance records and teams moving to bigger arenas and all these things that happened. But then the on-court stuff. Okay, yeah, like she had her rookie struggles for sure. The first month or so of the season had an extremely, and I mean like historically difficult schedule. I think the WNBA like panicked a little bit with that schedule. They were like, let's put as many Caitlin Clark games as possible so that we can make sure that people are watching. And I think they overdid it, frankly.
Still won Rookie of the Year almost unanimously.
It's not like Caitlin is not deserving for what she is doing on the court for some of these accolades, but the off-court stuff and the impact for sure is why it garners a recognition like a Time Athlete of the Year.
The processing was different. The just using screens to her advantage from a basketball standpoint also, and was just getting better at creating her shot as the season went along, look more comfortable. I still think a lot was put on her on the offense, which is why, like, even if you look at her college career, like she's turned the ball over a lot, but that's because her usage is also also very high. So I wonder what that's going to look like if they fill out the roster better. And then off the court, you mentioned the Time interview, and so did I. The quote that got people up in arms, which pretty benign, but this is part of the effect and the experience that I want to touch on briefly before we get out of here. Her quote, the money quote, so to speak. I want to say I've earned every single thing, but as a white person, this is her talking. There is privilege. Clark told Time, a lot of those players in the league that have been really good have been black players. This league has kind of been built on them. The more we can appreciate that, highlight that, talk about that, and then continue to have brands and companies invest in those players that have made this league incredible, I think it's very important. I have to continue to try to change that. The more we can elevate black women, that's going to be a beautiful thing.
I just think that when you read back what she's saying, I just don't see that as controversial. I just don't see it.
But if you are from a certain part of the country or think a certain way or from a certain neighborhood, like there are, like, to me and you, rational people who are, like fair-minded and all these different things, like, and are pro what Caitlin Clark is talking about here. Yeah, we're going to look at that and be like, yeah, absolutely. We agree that should be done. But there are other people who are racist who are not going to see it that way. This is what Jonquel Jones had been talking about. And this was an appearance on the Pivot, and she also tweeted about this. I think a lot of the fans, the Caitlin Clark fans, I think they wanted to latch on to Caitlin Clark and then use her as this fuel to be able to be the way that they wanted to be, is what
Mhm.
she told Ryan Clark. And I think that that's why there was such a big backlash when she liked the whole Taylor Swift post saying that Taylor Swift was going to vote for Kamala Harris.
Mhm.
And Caitlin Clark liked it, and there was people commenting on Caitlin Clark's page like, "Hey, you shouldn't have chose a side. We're not going to support you anymore." Da, 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 da. Back to the Jonquel Jones quote, because they want her as in Caitlin, to be a representation of their racism and their view on the world, and she's not like that. And she continued, and I think you have to be careful when you say the Fever fans, because I don't think it's just Fever fans. I think it's people that wanted Caitlin Clark to be a certain type of way. They thought that she was. And so they became Caitlin Clark fans, basically assuming that she was that way. And now they've realized, oh no, she's not actually racist. As what Jonquel
Right.
Jones said about Caitlin Clark, which I think was an interesting way to put it. It doesn't seem like, to Jonquel Jones' point, she's what some of her core fans want her to be.
I also just think a huge problem today, and particularly on social media, is that people want you to pick a side.
On
And
everything. Yeah.
sometimes there isn't a side. Sometimes it's okay to be down the middle, to be reasonable, to be moderate in your opinion. And I just think that what Caitlin said is, not extreme in one way or the other. She's not apologizing for who she is. She's not saying she's undeserving. She is uplifting others, which is okay to do. It doesn't have to always be, well,
Right.
I'm the one who did this. Like that's arrogant. And so I just think that sometimes people they nitpick and they really overthink and manipulate these things because they're trying to fit into a side rather than just accepting for what it is, which sometimes isn't a side. And I certainly think you can be a fan of a player and what they do, even if you don't identify with their political leaning. And also to assume everything based on what you like on social media, it's just like it's bogus.
It's
Like,
2025. That's what it
and
is.
so and that's why I actually think that Caitlyn has been smart about not just she doesn't just talk, and she is careful and selective, because I think she wants to make sure if she's going to put her opinions out there, that it's in a forum that's going to be allowing her to really, explain and get into things. And I just was, like I said, just super impressed by the
Yeah.
timepiece. And I thought that she addressed everything with a lot of clarity, a lot of sense, just common sense.
And she's smart. She's hyper aware that her words mean something, which is why I don't think. And there was a time like earlier in the year when all the shit was going on with Dejanay Carrington, and then her
Mhm.
fans were attacking Dejanay Carrington, and I was like, she being Caitlyn, she should probably say something about this at some point.
Mhm.
And because her fans are going crazy, but and she did eventually because she was asked about it. And I
Mhm.
think with Jonquel Jones pointing out, like, listen, she's not that way.
Mhm.
I A lot of people got mad at that too, but I mean,
People are always going to get mad. Like I said,
that's part of it too.
no one's ever going to be 100%. 100% of people aren't always going to be satisfied with, no matter what someone does. But going back to kind of taking it back to like on the court, like,
Yeah,
I think it's not, I'm not saying anything groundbreaking here, but I also think that just the style of play that Caitlyn embodies was something that we had never seen before. And that's also what sort of catapulted her into, oh, have you seen that girl that pulls up from the logo and has the audacity to like shoot threes like Steph Curry, and also is leading, the NCAA in assists, and like, ends up coming into the W and is leading the W in assists. Like that style of play was it was captivating. And it's not saying that any of these other great players aren't that there are a lot of captivating things. I just think that it was a swirl of all these different factors coming together, and certainly the newness of what she was doing was, became a must watch phenomenon.
Yeah. In summary, what I think this is going to look like is she'll be top 5 in scoring. She was close this year as a rookie. I didn't think the scoring would be there right away, and it wasn't until it was, and it was. So I think she'll be top 5 in scoring. I think she'll be top 5 in assists. She might be first in assists, for being honest. She will. I think the percentages will be better. She'll be a top 5 MVP candidate. The Fever should be back in the playoffs. They'll make moves to try to around her. And then off the court, I still think she's going to have a wealth of support. I hope that her fans aren't as some of the fans, because some of the
Yeah,
fans, this is not a representation of all Caitlin Clark fans,
sure.
but I hope that some of the like super extreme ones are maybe less so now that she says some things, and we could really focus on like, to tie this all together, how her game is growing, along with how the league is growing, along with how the league's players are growing,
Yeah.
and how everything is just sort of moving forward. Like, I think she's going to be a great player next year, one of the best players in the league. And I think off the court, it's still going to be sellout after sellout. The ratings are going to be there.
Yeah.
And she's going to be even better this time. Like, it's not even going to be a curiosity on like how she's going to be. It's like, all right, now can she make this jump into being undisputed one of the best players in this league right away?
All right. Two quick things I want to mention before I shut my
Yes.
trap and we get out of here. But one, you mentioned Angel Reese. A big part of this compelling nature of WNBA storylines was certainly the rivalry, if you want to call it that, between
It is.
Caitlyn and Angel
It
Reese.
is. On
And
the court, like, I don't think they have
yeah,
beef, like actual beef,
no,
but
no, no. And
they're
Caitlyn
not
had addressed
BFFs
that.
either.
Both Caitlyn and Angel have addressed
Yeah.
their relationship, and they're perfectly cordial, whatever. Um, but and it's not like, again, they don't play the same position. It's not
Right.
like they're guarding each other, whatever.
Right.
But there is history there from their college days into pro days, and I just think it was super smart of the W to put, opening night of 2025. Guess who's on the marquee? Angel Reese versus Caitlin Clark.
On a
We're,
Saturday.
we're running it back, baby, and they upped the amount of they're going to meet 5 times, which is going to be dope. And I mean, every time they met, it was ratings frenzy last season, and they were all like, good games, and it was exciting. And then they teamed up on the All-Star team, which was awesome. Like the Clark to Reese assist, I thought was a money moment from last season, and so we're going to have more of that. And then one final thing I'll just mention is a lot of the league, I should say, a lot of the team executives have been hyper aware of how this league is booming. And that's evidenced by the amount of turnover we're seeing in the coach and GM seats. So we're having all of these
Yeah.
coaching
Great point.
changes, some of which I don't think were warranted, to be honest. Teresa Weatherspoon being one of them. But you could just you could see that these like owners were kind of like panicking, like, oh my God, like we got to level up here, we gotta make change, we gotta do this, we gotta do that. I think sometimes, again, not always warranted, um but like that's just something to take note of in terms of like the league is gonna there's gonna be a lot of change. I think and it's positive, but a lot of new faces, a lot of changing in how you invest in the team, the resources, the management, all those things, navigating the expansion drafts. Like it's a very, very intriguing time.
That's Maria Marino. We're going to be talking about the WNBA again, and also the NBA, because she does cover the NBA as well. A lot to go through here. Hopefully, people enjoy it, dissect it, and look, W is right around the corner. We're already going to be talking about free agency very soon. And it's an exciting time. Free agency, draft, training camp, like all that stuff is like right around the corner. Follow Maria at Maria C. Marino on social media. Her work contributing to ESPN, and also other pending things in the works, which she'll post about. And if you like the video, comment, do all the things, yada, yada, yada. Thank you for your support.
And also, People don't take my comments to be too controversial, but I just want to say thank you, Bryan, for the therapy session, because clearly
You had a lot to get off your
I
chest.
had to get some stuff off my chest. So thank you.
That's the best. That's the best in this industry. Thanks, Maria.